Let's figure out what kind of inheritance pattern this pedigree is showing us. Remember that circles represent females and squares represent males. Any circle or square that's shaded in represents an individual who is affected. This pedigree is not going to show us carriers of certain traits. It's just going to show us who has and who doesn't have a specific trait. Let's take a look at the autosomal dominant inheritance. This person is affected, which means they have at least one dominant allele. Now, that dominant allele had to come from one of the two parents. And seeing that neither parent has a dominant allele, this cannot be an autosomal dominant inheritance. This is because if either parent had a dominant allele, they would be affected. And you can see from this pedigree, they're not. So this pedigree is not showing us an autosomal dominant disorder. Let's check the next one, autosomal recessive. This person would be a homozygous recessive genotype, which means they would have to get one of each of those alleles from the parents. Now remember, this pedigree is not showing us heterozygous or the carriers, which means each one of these individuals could be heterozygous and have that recessive trait. And each one of these other siblings could be possible since the parents are both heterozygous. So this pedigree is showing a possible autosomal recessive trait. Now let's take a look at the X-linked dominant inheritance. This individual is going to be X big H Y. That's because they're a male and they have the disorder. Now, this individual would have had inherited that X big H from the mother. And seeing that the mother doesn't have the disorder, that means that this cannot be an X-linked dominant disorder. Because if she had it and she was going to pass it on to her offspring, she would also be affected, and she is not in this pedigree. Remember, in these dominant disorders, if you have one of those alleles, you are going to exhibit that trait. So this pedigree is not showing us an X-linked dominant disorder. Let's take a look at the X-linked recessive trait. That means this person is going to be X little h Y. Remember that the son is going to inherit its Y chromosome from the father and his X chromosome from the mother. And in this case, the mother would have an X little h. And that is possible. Remember, we're not showing the carriers in this pedigree. All of the siblings are possible as well, since the father would pass on an X big H Y, which means that all these others would be possible. This son could be possible since the mother has a big H and a little h on the X chromosomes, and she would just pass on that big H to this son. So X-linked recessive is possible in this pedigree. And lastly, Y-linked, which is probably one of the easier ones to find out. This person is affected and the father is not affected, so this cannot be a Y-linked trait. This is because in Y-linked inheritance, if one male has it, then his offspring has to have it as well. So in this case, the father doesn't have it, so it can't be Y-linked. So the only two types of inheritance patterns this pedigree can show is an autosomal recessive and an X-linked recessive.